measure, the Lord is throwing in all those other lives as well. Yeah, it's just kind of a heaping bowl of generosity. And the Apostle Paul says, an angel has informed me that I'm going to make it, and, well, you're going to make it too. And so that's what's being told. It says, last night an angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve, stood beside me and said, do not be afraid, Paul. That's probably something he needed to be told, because he was afraid before that. It says, do not be afraid. You must stand trial before Caesar, and God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. That's a tremendous thing. I don't know if we want to call it the extensive generosity of the grace of God. But it's this way, Paul, you are going to be spared. I want you to stand trial in Rome. And as a matter of fact, all those other people on board with you are going to be spared as well. And still that grace is out there, and still that kindness is out there. I haven't read the book on close calls in American history, but believe me, there have been times when it has been so close. General Washington, for example, there was this fog that came in, and it caused him to be able to take all his boats and his men to quietly go across the river to the other side. And if he had not done that in the morning, he would have been faced by these powerful British troops, and his army would have been destroyed. And there are many examples of where God in his kindness just did something to preserve the ship on which we are riding. He says, you must stand trial before Caesar, and God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. So keep your courage, men, for I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told me. Nevertheless, we must run aground on some island. Some island? There are no islands out there. That's what the sailors would say to him. Well, the next heading has to do with the shipwreck. And what really happens now is that on the 14th night, we were still being driven across the Adriatic Sea when about midnight the sailors sensed they were approaching land. They took soundings and found that the water was 120 feet deep. Short time later they took soundings again, and it was 90 feet deep. Fearing that they would be dashed against the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for daylight. So they know they're getting closer to land. Of course, they don't want to do a crash landing onto that land, so they're trying to hold the ship up a little longer, praying for dawn, praying for daylight. Almost like the sailors had become people of prayer, because now they're pleading with God to hasten the hour when the sun will rise once again. Well, it says these sailors were kind of rascals because they decided they were going to leave the ship if they could and take the lifeboat and get their own skins saved and let all the rest just perish. So these sailors, praying sailors, aren't necessarily noble sailors, because we read, in an attempt to escape from the ship, the sailors let the lifeboat down into the sea, pretending they were going to lower some anchors from the bow. So even though it was dark out, Paul must have kept an eye on it, and others as well. Then Paul said to the centurion, this is Paul, the prisoner, saying to the centurion, the Roman commander, he's saying, if those men are allowed to leave the ship, then all of us will be destroyed. And that's what he says. Then Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved. So the centurion gave the command, because it says, so the soldiers cut the ropes that held the lifeboat and let it fall away. Do you ever, have you ever seen such a thing? A prisoner tells a Roman commander, shall we say, what's got to happen next? And the Roman commander says, do what he says. I suppose in American history there have been times where you get some little person from some little place, and he says something to the high and the mighty, and the high and the mighty say, you know, the guy is right. We better listen to him. And there's some wonderful thing that happens because the high and mighty listen to the lowly. And that's what you have here. The Apostle Paul says that lifeboat just cut the ropes, let it crash into the shore on its own. Then it says, just before dawn, Paul urged them all to eat. For the last 14 days, he said, you have been in constant suspense and have gone without food. You haven't eaten anything. Sometimes somebody's keeping track of the days. Sometimes somebody's keeping their courage up. Sometimes somebody's watching what's happening. And Paul would be in that place, and many citizens would be in that kind of place as well. Vigilant is what the word would be, standing guard. For the last 14 days, he said, you have been in constant suspense and have gone without food. You haven't eaten anything. Now I urge you to take some food. You need it to survive. It's almost like a mother speaking to the children saying, now you get your nourishment, will you please? And that's what the Apostle Paul is doing to these passengers who probably haven't shown him a bit of appreciation. And that's the way it will go sometimes. The people giving concern and care are the ones who are not getting patted on the back. But here we go. It says, after he had said this, he took some bread and gave thanks to God in front of them all. Then he broke it and began to eat. You know, that's called the Lord's Supper, right in the midst of a raging storm, riding on a ship that's ready to fly apart. And that's more true of the situation of the country than what we may think. It's always that way, but it's worse when a storm hits. A ship can make it quite nicely from port A to port B when there's no storm. But when the storm hits, then the inclination to fly apart is increased by about 80% perhaps. And now Paul says to them, you need some food. And then he models how that's done. Takes the food, gives thanks, breaks it, and he goes, watch me. He starts eating the food. They were all encouraged and ate some food themselves. Now, we've never heard